Welcome back. To refresh, my personal and professional background is noted on the screen. You may Google me to learn more about my body of work, or search MusicsEnergy in Google or YouTube to access the music I've produced with young people since 2004. I'm excited to introduce to some of you and update others on what's new with MusicsEnergy, the Life Literacy Curriculum, and music and media therapy. Now, let's continue to connect the dots. As a result of COVID, there are some familiar and new challenges facing all of us. They include, and this list is definitely not exhaustive, mounting frustration surrounding economic uncertainty, economic isolation of the poor in high crime neighborhoods, more teachers and health and human service providers who are experiencing compassion fatigue or burnout, fewer reliable governmental services offered now that all the post-COVID money is gone, and heightened tensions and growing apathy due to a highly volatile political climate. So here's what we know now and knew before COVID. Stress is something that can affect our mind, body, and spirit, and stress is something we all must deal with, some more than others, right? And then there's anxiety, depression, and conduct disorders and attention disorders in schools, which can all be linked to stress. Not always, but they certainly can be. So, who is more likely to experience stress based on race, class, gender, and sexual orientation, or the interaction of these social constructions of personhood? And in a school setting, how might anxiety, depression, conduct disorders, and attention deficit disorders be predictably more concentrated based on our history and what we know about the socio-ecological model? These are interesting times in which we are living, this post-COVID era. And increasingly, we need knowledge about healthy stress management and healthy coping strategies. We actually need more than just knowledge. We need access to services. Tension is mounting. And the enemy, and I want to define the enemy as the information news industry and media entertainment. The enemy and the enemy is seeking to distract those who are not anchored and who do not have the skills and abilities needed to survive and thrive in times like these. Relevant education for the I generation must emphasize healthy conceptions of self and self-care, public safety and common decency, personal and social awareness, personal and social responsibility, and what it means to be well. And yes, social justice cannot be ignored. So let's get into some good stuff. Some of you may question why it's necessary to talk about the social constructions of personhood, given this is a highly sensitive subject. But my response is, why not? It's much easier to avoid conversations about race, class, gender, and sexual orientation. But isn't school where we should have these conversations, or at least one place where training on how to have these conversations should take place? Isn't this where we want to teach and model the balance between cultural humility and self-pride? Isn't this where we also want to teach common decency and respect? Are we afraid to address these topics because we fear it may reveal too much about us? Is this too up close and personal? Well, what if there was a way to purposefully address these topics to gain a better understanding about health and disease in context, all while promoting health, hope, and healing, and having fun with music? Could unpacking messages in music and co-creating music with this historically based, contextually correct understanding, could this spawn new approaches such as co-writing songs with young people? And could this help us reduce disease in America? Not just for those who have clinical indicators, but for everyone in what we call the tier 1, 2 structure. I think so, and the evidence suggests we can. Intersectionality theory and social learning or social cognitive theory are integral to understanding and deploying judicious uses of music. Let's establish that. And this is what drives me to share MusicsEnergy and music and media therapy with you today. I believe we can dramatically improve health outcomes by focusing on hope and healing in times like these. So let's visit the controversial 1619 project and see what others have to say and what other clues we may find.
We need to understand as New Yorkers that this was not a Southern phenomenon, that slavery was a national phenomenon. There was a lot of money being made without you personally having to have owned other human beings.
The New York Times editor describes something at least 6 years older than New York.
There's almost nothing in America that's 400 years old, but slavery is one of those things.
Nicole Hannah-Jones created the New York Times Magazine's 1619 Project, named after the year the first enslaved Africans landed in what became the U.S.
I wanted to show that you could look around almost anything in modern American life and see the remnants of that legacy, from why we don't have universal health care, why we consume so much sugar, that a place like New York City does not become the financial capital of the world without slavery.
But 1619 has also drawn criticism.
The whole project is a lie.
Former Republican House Speaker and historian Newt Gingrich was the most vocal of a variety of conservative critics.
We worked really hard, and we had panels of scholars helping us to make sure that we got things right. But if you just don't like the way that we're presenting the story of history, deal with it.
African-American conservative Robert Woodson said 1619 hurts blacks by ignoring success. Its creator says that's the opposite of the project's purpose.
It shows the resiliency of the ancestors, that all of these descendants were in the position to do this and present our own stories in the magazine. Hopefully 20 years from now, we don't have to reteach adults this history.
But where those more lofty aspects make their strongest effect, maybe a place like this, a New York City public high school.
The legacy of slavery and racism all the way up to today.
Manhattan's Facing History School is one of at least 12,000 nationwide where the 1619 Project is available as a teaching tool. Eric Albino co-teaches American history with Alexa Akil.
Slavery is just a thing that happened. Oh, that happened.
Was students' former attitude, she says. With 1619, the results reflect the vision of the project's founder.
Help black kids and white kids and brown kids truly understand the role that black Americans have played.
It's good to know and see how far we've come and how we ended up in this good situation, but then it's like sad to know that that's the history that we had to go through.
It inspires me. If I'm in a situation where kind of the odds stacked against me, I just gotta believe in myself.
The project's creator says that while slavery's effects are wide-ranging, people of color still triumph.
To make an argument that black people believed in our founding ideals, even when they had no reason to. There is no greater belief in America and the ideals of America than that.
And that's the thrust of this work, that it's patriotic that African Americans have believed in the promise of this country despite going from being property to being treated as second-class citizens to being discriminated against and so on and so on. Overcoming in spite of that and holding the country accountable to its promise is a story, ultimately, of inspiration.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's so powerful, and as I watch that piece, I think about sort of what I learned when I was in school growing up, and it was a chapter in a book, and it was you watch Roots, and then it's like you move on to the next thing.
That's exactly right.
And it's exactly like, you're actually, you know, I love the idea of digging deeper and actually telling these stories that people don't know.
Right, and the great thing about it is it covers such a wide array of how slavery has affected American history and culture and life today, that it could be interspersed throughout the year. So that class, for instance, when they'll certainly use it for their coverage of the Civil War, but then when they talk about New York history and culture, there's a section about hip hop and how its roots are rooted in slavery. They'll use that toward the end of the year, and so on and so forth. It is wide-ranging and very applicable.
What was your impression talking to those kids and how they feel about it going forward? Because it really is, like you said, very different from what we learned.
Yes, they were very pleased with it. And what was also impressive is you look at the thing, and I know you all have looked at the 1619 project. Some of that material is really dense and very heady. But the fact of the matter is there's so much of it that's so accessible to such a wide variety of people. And so at the Facing History School, yeah, they were using it in that 11th grade class, but you could easily use it in a 9th grade class, a 6th grade class.
And I'm sure we'll be seeing that.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. James, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
All I can say is, wow. Knowledge is powerful because it gives us the power to evolve and overcome fear. Once we become aware and awakened, and you have the context, you can never be lulled back into being mindlessly unaware or asleep again. We have a choice now. Have you guys heard about the ACE study? Okay, I want to specifically talk about two categories of interest to the research team who conducted the ACE study. And the ACE study is something I'll ask you to look up, but the categories of interest that we'll talk about are abuse and neglect. Please remember this slide. We're about to speed up quite a bit. So please note we will be talking about emotional neglect and 3 specific types of abuse over the course of our remaining time: emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. Okay? I'll need you to stay with me to connect the dots, even if you don't agree with something along the way. And for abuse, let's focus on this category called a parent or other adult. And some of the characteristics of this kind of abuse is swearing at you or putting you down or humiliating you as the types of adverse childhood events or experiences that this study is concerned with. These are the kind of types of abuses. And then another example, it's made you feel afraid that you might be physically hurt or pushed or grabbed or slapped or thrown something thrown at you or even hit you, or to touch or fondle you, or have you touch or fondle another person in a sexual way. These were all considered forms of abuse. And then likewise, neglect was defined as feeling no one in your family loves you or thought you were important or special. Neglect was also considered not having enough to eat, having to wear dirty clothes, and having no one to protect you. Neglect also included misuse of alcohol or other drugs, such that it rendered the parent or other adult as incapable of taking care of a child or adolescent in the home. I want you to keep these in mind as we continue to move through this conversation, because we will be connecting the dots along the way. We're going to talk about a selected study category called family background and household environment. And please keep the socio-ecological model that I introduced a while back in mind as we consider the following 5 study categories within this broad category called family background and household environment. Stay with me. So, paternal separation or divorce, treatment of mother in the home, household use of alcohol, tobacco, or other drugs, household mental abuse, and incarcerated household member. This arrow illustrates the trajectory of life from conception to death that is most likely when a child is exposed to one of these adverse childhood experiences or events. This model illustrates that exposure to an adverse childhood experience, even at conception, may disrupt normal neurodevelopment, leading to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. Such impairment increases the uptake of risky, unhealthy behavior, and dis-ease, disability, and social problems, and ultimately early death are all likely outcomes. The cumulative disadvantages of adverse childhood experiences at the individual and group levels is at an all-time high, perhaps because of COVID, creating unprecedented disinterest and disengagement in any form of education, particularly when compulsory, that is not relevant to the lived experiences of those receiving said education. This is a partial list of potential outcomes of those who may experience adverse childhood events. This is sort of just a selected list. And it's important to talk about these. One, because we'll see some connections as this continues. But here they are. Low self-esteem, feelings of worthlessness, addiction, anxiety, depression, suicide. Again, just a partial list. Now let's check out this video about public schooling.
The model of going to school to learn is relatively new. Before 1900, most children learned at home and out in the real world. In 1837, the state of Massachusetts formed the first state board of education, with Horace Mann as its secretary. Mann believed that everyone was entitled to the same content in education. Returning from a research trip to Germany in 1848, Mann lobbied heavily to have the Prussian model adopted. He quickly set about establishing a statewide system of common schools, staffed by professionally trained teachers. His ideas quickly gained momentum, and by 1852, Massachusetts passed a compulsory attendance law. Mann also believed that school could become a great equalizer, and values such as obedience to authority, promptness in attendance, and organizing time according to bell ringing would help students prepare for future employment in an industrial age.
And the whole purpose of it is to create a docile factory military workforce. The whole purpose is to subordinate children and get them in that mindset of being subordinated so they grow up to be subordinated adults.
This is the poorest class I've had.
Prussian schooling had been out to destroy the imagination. In every public library worth its salt in the United States and in every college library, you will find a collection of essays by a Prussian philosopher, Johann Fichte. Fichte said we have to set up a system of universal forced schooling in which we destroy the imagination. Bells, ordered lessons, constant testing, ranking.
The entire system is designed to regiment a large group of people and to get them all to do the exact same thing.
By 1900, 34 states had compulsory schooling laws. Half the nation's children attended one-room schools. And by 1918, every state required students to complete elementary school.
The reality is they want children to take their place in society, be cogs, and keep this system going. So you're going to school to take your place.
Now the trouble's with your attitude. You don't pay enough attention in class. You don't do enough work outside of it.
Here are the facts. The U.S. educational system was set up by white people to serve the interest of white people. Some assert that one reason why the current educational system does not work with the masses of black and brown children is the failure of curriculum instruction and therapy to harness intelligence, and intelligence with the purpose of solving some of the cultural and racial problems that plague masses of black and brown and marginalized people in the United States. The education of black children in particular, some believe, must be based on addressing the psychology that flows from American history and a historically based contextual understanding of that history. And even though some things may have changed, instruction and therapy that fails to reflect the epigenetics of generational disease and division wreaks havoc on children by asking them to participate in a process that ignores a key aspect of motivation. And that key aspect is to solve problems that are aligned with their interests and survival. Additionally, the psychological underpinnings of standardizing education warrant some attention. Has it ever occurred to you that it might be outright traumatizing to some children to be subjected to an education that seeks to standardize learning objectives when there are fundamental differences between the destiny of those who are marginalized based on these social constructions and or versus those who have power and privilege based on these social constructions? Listen, I understand the fear of those who are afraid of what would happen if we taught from an HBCU perspective. But my hope is that when MusicsEnergy and MMT are combined with other interventions and therapeutic approaches, everyone involved experiences some sort of transformation, and that we move beyond our perceived limitations and just be human. The impact these social constructions have had on our individual, collective, and cumulative experiences motivates me greatly. What about you? And by the way, the definition of fear is false evidence appearing real. So as we move through the rest of this presentation, I want to reassure you that I know this is disrupting the status quo, but I also want you to know that I am here to disrupt with healthy intentions and not to incite fear or violence. One of the greatest propaganda campaigns of all time was the masterful marketing of the myth of Black inferiority to justify slavery within a democracy. The early American ruling class used every available tool: religion, law, politics, art, literature, and even science to bolster this myth. In MusicsEnergy, we teach the importance of educational therapy that strips away multiple layers of complex conditioning around race and implicit bias as it relates to these social constructions. And specifically, we provide opportunities for those who serve to acquire knowledge, skills, and abilities that enable them to deconstruct messages in music and media and to create content that aligns with an awareness and a reminder of our responsibility to choose embracing health versus disease, hope over hate or despair, and healing. Traditionally, intelligence measures are used to predict success. But there is more to learning to be successful than just intelligence. Social and emotional learning, or SEL, is the process of how children and adults learn, acquire, and apply skills like understanding and managing emotions, setting and working toward positive goals, problem solving, cooperation, establishing and maintaining positive relationships, and healthy and responsible decisions. As artificial intelligence continues to creep into our daily lives, we may soon have to face a difficult choice. What do we do with compassion and empathy? How do we program empathy to mimic that human emotion? These and similar kinds of dilemmas are what the I generation faces. As we saw earlier, creativity is the highest form of intelligence. We hope to inspire young people in this generation. to create solutions and have the opportunity to use these incredible tools like music and film. They are well poised to generate their own news, information, and media entertainment. But it's up to us whether we will join them in their world and bring along the best of ours, or they will surely demonstrate their disengagement in our world in more than one way. These are 5 competencies of social and emotional learning, 5 popular common ones. Mentioning SEL is still okay in some circles and completely not okay, interestingly, in others, all within one state. That's definitely the case in the state of South Carolina. But for our purposes, we'll call these skills life literacy skills. Okay? So self-awareness is having a well-rounded sense of confidence, optimism, and having a growth mindset. These are our definitions as well. Self-management is effectively managing stress, being able to control our impulses, and the ability to motivate yourself to set and achieve goals. Social awareness is understanding the perspectives of others and having emotional intelligence to be able to empathize, and to show compassion toward those of diverse backgrounds and cultures. Relationship skills are skills that enable you to communicate clearly, to include listening well, cooperating with others, resisting inappropriate social pressure, and having the ability to effectively negotiate conflict. And lastly, responsible decision-making is the ability to make constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions based on ethical standards, safety, social norms, and personal values. The benefits of curriculum, instruction, and therapy that promote social and emotional learning include 1. An increase in social skills and the ability to reflect emotional intelligence. 2. Improved emotional regulation, often resulting in a reduction in conduct problems, aggressive behavior, and emotional distress. We know from years of research that character matters. But the key question is whether character matters in times like these, and if so, how do we cultivate it? Some main takeaways from Paul Tough's work are that A, managing stress, B, regulating emotions, C, embracing hope and optimism are the 3 ways to cultivate character. A hopeless outlook about life is the antithesis of optimism. Optimism was literally, intentionally, and systemically withheld from the collective consciousness of enslaved Africans. You'll see where I'm going in a minute. The founding fathers of the United States intended slavery to be the eternal plight of Black people in America. Indentured servitude would evolve, followed by freedom that would be forever tethered to this checkered history of government-sanctioned slavery. Somehow, some way, Black people held on to optimism, however. So why is this characteristic so important to success? Why was there such a concerted effort to stamp out any expression of optimism, of hope, or hope about freedom, liberty, and justice for all? What's that all about? According to Paul Tough in his book, How Children Succeed when we teach them to 1, recognize distractions, 2, avoid mental traps, 3, recognize emotional and behavioral triggers and manage emotions, and then 4, align our behavior with good decision making by consciously controlling impulses. Wow. Imagine if these school skills were taught in schools serving historically marginalized children and youth, and if we made a concerted effort to include parents, guardians, and concerned others. You will see how these skills map on to executive functionings as we continue. And I will not only continue highlighting population differences, I will also share more about why some of those we serve may benefit specifically from this historically based, contextually correct understanding of health and disease. Therapeutic education includes cognitive and non-cognitive skills, but our approach to therapeutic education provides a much needed historically based, contextually correct understanding of health and disease since the founding of the United States of America, and these population differences that explain the so-called health disparities and achievement gaps. We emphasize mindful awareness of the ability to transcend perceived limitations and the need to embrace hope as a necessary component of healing and remaining healthy. Additionally, persistence, self-control, curiosity, consciousness, grit, and self-confidence are all inherent to our approach to delivering relevant education for the I generation. Now, let's connect the dots between early exposure to adverse childhood experiences and school outcomes. So are kids with high ACE scores more likely to have learning and behavioral problems? Yup. That should come as no surprise. Yes, there is a connection between stress and behavior. The fact is, children growing up in stressful environments find it harder to A, sit still and concentrate, B, follow directions, and C, rebound from disappointments. And why is this? Well, we believe because the part of the brain that is affected the most by early stress is the prefrontal cortex. And this happens to be the part of the brain that is critical in self-regulation and all kinds of self-regulatory activities, including behavior. Additionally, there is a connection between stress, the body, and the brain via this prefrontal cortex and issues like anxiety and depression and difficulty regulating emotions. You see, the adolescent brain is still under construction, but there are two highly active systems at play during the brain development of the adolescent. One is called the incentive processing system, which is the sensation-seeking side of the brain that is more emotionally reactive and attentive to social information. And the other is the cognitive processing system, which is the side of the brain that is rational and linear. It's the side of the brain that allows regulation of urges. So keeping this in mind, childhood trauma can be directed and expressed inwardly, manifesting emotionally as fear and anxiety and sadness and self-doubt, and maybe even manifested as self-destructive tendencies. Or childhood trauma may also be directed outwardly, manifesting behaviorally, expressing as fighting and acting up in class, or eventually breaking the law, behaving in other antisocial ways. So as we connect the dots again, here are a few main takeaways. A, all young people should receive a relevant, quality education, including schooling, on how to address problems facing children, youth, and families that look like them and others, regardless of their social economic background. While some young people need less encouragement to complete high school, many must be encouraged to see the relevance of education offered in school and their day-to-day lived experiences in the skin they're in. Exposure to people who value education and see education as a pathway to upward mobility and security is necessary. And again, another couple of takeaways. For some, this exposure and a willingness to be transparent about these social constructions and how these constructions have functioned generationally is all that's needed to wake them up and get them to start dreaming. Encouragement should not only be in the form of preparing young people academically, but emotionally. And I believe this awakening will have positive benefits both socially and behaviorally, especially when we seek to address identity formation, values, coping, and strategies of communication, all aligned with what we know about health, hope, and healing. Folks, I think this is relevant education for the I generation, and my practice has proven me correct. Thank you for your attention. Please select part 3 of 4 to continue this presentation entitled MusicsEnergy, How to Use Music in Clinical, School, and Community Settings. This presentation was given at the 2024 Southeastern School Behavioral Health Conference, April 25th in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Got me thinking about, always running in and out of my head. I feel alive again, 'cause you bring my life some